Israel is a country that should not exist as an agricultural nation. 60% of its land is desert. Its average annual rainfall is less than half the global average. It shares one of the most water-stressed regions on Earth, with neighbors whose water situations range from difficult to desperate. The Jordan River, the river that defined this region for 3,000 years, now carries less water than a moderately sized irrigation canal. And yet, Israel exports more than $3 billion worth of agricultural products every year. It grows tomatoes, peppers, avocados, and citrus fruit at commercial scale in a desert. It supplies fresh produce to Europe through the winter months. It has more agricultural startups per capita than any country except the United States. How? The answer involves some of the most impressive water engineering in human history. Technology that the rest of the world is now copying as fast as it can. And a second answer? Quieter, less celebrated, almost never discussed in the same breath as the drip irrigation and the desalination plants. That changes the meaning of everything Israel built. Israel's water story is one of the most genuinely impressive engineering achievements of the 20th century. And it deserves to be told honestly, which means telling all of it. By 2015, Israel had achieved something no country in a comparable climate had ever achieved. It was producing more fresh water through desalination than it was extracting from natural water sources. It had, by the conventional definition used by water security analysts, solved its fresh water problem. Here is the question that the case studies, the TED Talks, and the technology export agreements never quite get to. If Israel solved its water crisis, and the technology it used is real, proven, and being adopted globally, why do the 2.5 million Palestinians living in the West Bank have access to approximately 73 liters of water per person per day, while Israeli settlers living on the same aquifer, in the same climate, in some cases within walking distance, have access to approximately 300 liters? The answer involves cloud seeding, and it involves a water rights framework that most international coverage of Israeli water technology quietly omits. Israel's cloud seeding program is one of the longest-running and best documented in the world. It has been operating continuously since the 1970s, targeting cloud formations over the Sea of Galilee, Lake Kinneret, which is the primary freshwater reservoir for Israel's national water carrier. Peer-reviewed studies of the Israeli program published over several decades consistently show statistically significant precipitation enhancement in the seeded areas, between 13% and 18% above baseline in well-documented operational periods. For a reservoir the size of the Kinneret, a 13% to 18% increase in annual inflow represents hundreds of millions of cubic meters of additional fresh water per year. Water that flows into Israeli infrastructure. Water that is allocated, distributed, and managed by Israeli water authorities. Now here's the part of the cloud seeding story that connects to the water rights question. The mountain aquifer is the largest groundwater system in the region. It sits beneath the West Bank, Palestinian territory under Israeli military administration since 1967, and it naturally flows westward into Israel proper. Under the Oslo II Accord signed in 1995, water extraction from the mountain aquifer was divided between Israeli and Palestinian use. The allocation gave Palestinians approximately 20% of the aquifer's annual yield, a figure that Palestinian water authorities and international observers have consistently argued does not meet the basic needs of the Palestinian population. Israel's cloud seeding program targets precipitation enhancement primarily over Israeli catchment areas and the Kinneret watershed. Enhanced precipitation recharges Israeli-controlled reservoirs and contributes to aquifer recharge in zones where extraction rights are predominantly Israeli. Cloud seeding does not create new water rights, but it increases the volume of water flowing through a system where the rights are already unequally distributed. More water in a system where one party controls 80% of the allocation means more water for the party that controls 80% of the allocation. The physics are neutral. The political framework they operate within is not. Let's trace what Israel's water technology achievements actually produced. All of them, not just the parts that appear in the TED Talks. Effect 1. The technology that works. Israel's desalination achievement is real and deserves to be stated clearly. 5 large-scale desalination plants now supply approximately 80% of Israel's domestic water consumption. The cost of desalinated water has dropped from approximately $1 per cubic meter in the early 2000s to less than 50 cents today. Driven by AI-optimized reverse osmosis membrane design and energy recovery systems that capture and reuse pressure from the desalination process itself. Israel also recycles approximately 90% of its wastewater for agricultural use, the highest rate of any country in the world, compared to a global average of approximately 10%. These achievements are genuine, they are transferable, and they are being transferred. Israel exports water technology to more than 150 countries, making water tech one of its most significant export industries. The drip irrigation systems now feeding millions of farmers across Africa, India, and South America largely derive from technology developed in Israel. This part of the story is true, and it matters. Effect 2. The water. That Palestinians don't have the World Health Organization recommends a minimum of 100 liters of water per person per day for basic health and dignity. This disparity is not primarily a result of technology gaps. Israel has demonstrated that desalination can produce virtually unlimited fresh water in this climate at costs that a middle-income economy can sustain. The disparity is a result of infrastructure access, permit systems, and water rights allocation frameworks that govern who can drill wells, build water systems, and connect to existing infrastructure in the West Bank. Since 1967, the Israeli military administration has controlled water infrastructure development in the West Bank. Palestinian applications to drill new wells or expand water systems require Israeli civil administration approval. Approvals that data compiled by the UN, World Bank, and multiple human rights organizations show are approved at dramatically lower rates for Palestinian applicants than for Israeli settlers in the same territory. The technology exists to give every person in this region 300 liters a day. The technology is not the reason some people have 73 effect. 3. The export paradox. Israel exports its water solutions to the world. Countries across 3 continents are installing Israeli drip irrigation, adopting Israeli wastewater recycling protocols, purchasing Israeli desalination technology. This is the paradox that sits at the center of Israel's water story. A country that demonstrably cannot, or will not, extend the water security it has achieved to the population living under its military administration in adjacent territory is simultaneously the world's most sought-after advisor on how to achieve water security. Both of those things are simultaneously true. The technology works everywhere Israel exports it. The technology also works in the West Bank. It is simply not being deployed there at the scale the population requires. Effect 4. What the world is copying and what it isn't. The global adoption of Israeli water technology is accelerating rapidly, driven by the same water scarcity pressures we have covered throughout this series and by the falling costs that AI optimization has produced. What the world is copying: drip irrigation, advanced desalination, wastewater recycling, cloud seeding optimization, precision agriculture water management. What the world is not copying, because it cannot be exported as technology, is the water rights framework that allowed Israel to build its water security at the expense of the population sharing the same aquifer. Most countries adopting Israeli water technology are doing so in their own domestic context, applying it to their own populations, solving their own water deficits, with the full legitimacy of sovereign resource management. The technology, applied fairly, is one of the most valuable things one country has ever shared with the world. The context in which it was developed is the part that never appears in the case study. Here is where I want to end this series. Not with a verdict on Israel, not with a verdict on the technology, with something more important than either. Over 10 videos, we have covered China's 35,000 weather engineers and the downstream countries that have no say in what they do. We covered the UAE spending $20 million a year to make it rain in a desert, and the sovereign question of what happens to moisture that was traveling somewhere else. We covered Iran accusing Israel of stealing its rain and finding that the atmospheric science is more complicated than the politics wanted it to be. We covered the US military weaponizing rain in Vietnam, Russia ordering the sky above Moscow to be clear, Bill Gates funding research into blocking the sun for the entire planet, China moving a river that 2 billion people downstream depend on. And now Israel, the country that came closer than any other to actually solving the water problem, and the gap between what the technology achieved and who it achieved it for. The surprising conclusion of this series is not that weather modification is dangerous, or that geoengineering is reckless, or that China is stealing water, or that Israel built its miracle on an injustice. The surprising conclusion is simpler and harder than any of those things. The technology to provide every human being on Earth with sufficient clean water already exists. Desalination, cloud seeding, drip irrigation, wastewater recycling, fog collection, AI-optimized atmospheric water generation. Every tool needed is real. Every tool is deployable. The costs have fallen to levels that are manageable for even middle-income economies with the right international financing frameworks. The water crisis is not a technology problem. It is a question about who the technology is for. That question, who the technology is for, is not answered by engineering. It is answered by the choices that people and governments make about who deserves access to the water that is already there. That is the end of Weather Wars Series 1. 10 videos, 1 atmosphere, 8 billion people sharing it without a framework that treats it as the common resource it is. Series 2 begins next week. We are going into the classified history of weather warfare. The programs that have never been fully declassified, the technology that defense agencies have spent 50 years developing after Operation Popeye, and the question of what modern AI-enabled weather modification means for the next armed conflict, wherever it occurs. If this series made you think differently about something, share it with someone who should see it. That is the most useful thing anyone watching this can do.